Center in Atlanta, Georgia. This is Joe Bruckner, B-R-U-C-K-N-E-R, and I'm speaking with Mrs. Janice Benario, B-E-N-A-R-I-O, about Miss Benario's experiences in World War II and before and after World War II. Miss Benario, we really appreciate you coming down here today and sharing your experiences, and looking forward to hearing your story.
Well, thank you.
Would you state your complete name and your date of birth, please?
Yes, I was born Janice Marguerite Martin in Baltimore, Maryland. I married Herbert Benario in 1957. I was born February 19th, 1923.
Okay. And you were born in Maryland?
In Baltimore.
Baltimore, okay. And where do you currently live?
I live in Atlanta. My husband accepted a position to teach at Emory in 1960. I came down and looked around and found one for me at Georgia State University. So we've been in Atlanta since 1960. I retired 20 years ago. He retired a couple of years later. And we now live in a new condominium right across the street from the Emory Law School. So we've always lived in the Emory neighborhood.
Okay. Ms. Benario, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. When you were born, your family, how your raising.
I am an only child. My father was an attorney. My mother was a housekeeper, stayed at home. And I went to the public schools in Baltimore, graduated from Western High School, and received a scholarship to go on to Goucher College. Really wanted to go away, but my father said with Goucher College 6 blocks down the street, there was no need to send me away. And so my war story really starts in my senior year at Goucher. I'll wait until you want me to get into that.
Where were you when war broke out, when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I remember hearing that over the radio. I was sitting in, I lived at home during college. Started college in '39. I was sitting studying on a Sunday afternoon when I heard about Pearl Harbor.
What was the reaction of you and your family and friends?
Well, I had heard my family talk a lot about World War I, and I really never thought I'd see another big war.
From that point forward, from Pearl Harbor on until you got involved in the war effort, what were you doing?
I was at Goucher College. I had started as a freshman in 1939.
Okay.
And so in '41 was the end of my sophomore year,
Okay.
a junior.
And did you go ahead and complete college?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay. Graduated
yes.
in like 1943 or something?
Graduated in 1943. My father had, and I had always planned that I'd go on to graduate school. There's no point in doing it in the war because most of the professors were also involved.
Tell us how you got involved in the war effort and what you did during the war.
Oh, that's quite a story, really. The Navy, shortly after Pearl Harbor, had formed its Women's Reserve, the WAVES, Women Accepted for Voluntary Emergency Service. Apparently, most of the girls who wanted to get in first were high school graduates and so went in as enlisted personnel. The Navy wanted to attract more college graduates, and so in the spring of 1942, first gave a course in cryptology to 7 of the leading women's colleges. Now that sounds like the 7 Sisters, and if one goes through the list, that is, bring my paper, but that's Smith, Wellesley, Mount Holyoke, Radcliffe, so on. But the 7th one, Barnard, wasn't there. Goucher College was put in its place, and that may have been because our Dean Stimson was cousin to the Secretary of War.
Oh.
So the course was given at Goucher in the spring of '42. I knew nothing about it because this was highly secret. I don't think anybody knew anything about it except the professor who was chosen to teach it, the dean, and the president. Certainly the other students didn't. In the fall of 1942, I was a senior Latin history major, and the professor, Ola Elizabeth Winslow, professor of English, herself a recent Pulitzer Prize winner for biography, asked me if I would like to join this group, this course in cryptology. I hardly knew what cryptology was at that point, but she explained that one could work for the war either through civil service or go into the Navy as a wave officer. And at that time, all the advantages seemed to lie in joining the service. We took this course, I guess it was 10, 12 weeks long. We were told, of course, when we were invited that this was secret. One did not talk to anyone about it. Of course, my parents knew I was taking the thing. We met once a week in a locked classroom late on Friday afternoon on the top floor of one of the classroom buildings. If any of our friends wanted to know what we were doing or why we were still staying down at school, we had to either make up something or go the other way, because it could not be broadcast that this course was being given. In the spring, the college held a public induction service for women going into all the services, the WACs, the WAVES, the SPARs, and we were inducted. After graduation, as midshipmen, we went to 8 weeks indoctrination either at Mount Holyoke or Smith. I was sent to Mount Holyoke. That took most of July and August of '43. We had exams, we learned to drill, we learned a lot of Navy regs and such. When we passed the exams and graduated, we were ensigns. As I remember it, there must have been 100, 125 in that class from all of these women's colleges. And a large proportion were to be sent to Naval Communications in Washington, D.C. We all went down there for general indoctrination. All of us were cleared to handle top secret material. We knew nothing could be said about whatever we did. Down there we got individual orders. One girl from Radcliffe, 2 others from Goucher, and I were assigned to the most highly classified office in the Naval Communications Annex. And that was the office which was reading the Enigma messages from the German Admiral Dönitz to his U-boats. We then went out to the Communications Annex. The Navy had taken over the old Mount Vernon Girls' School at the corner of Massachusetts and Nebraska in Washington. There we were told which offices we were assigned to and taken to them. The 4 of us were cleared to handle top secret ultra material. That's something no one else knew anything about, and we certainly couldn't tell anything about it. In fact, on that first day, we were told that to talk would be considered treason in wartime. You know, the punishment for treason, and so nobody talked.
Now, was Ultra the code name for the project?
I would like to, if I might, to approach this from a different angle,
Okay.
and then read something which I wrote first of all.
Okay.
Because of the secrecy of this, I had almost forgotten the whole story until 1991, when my husband got me a book called, by David Kahn, Seizing the Enigma. I was looking through it. There were some pictures in the middle, and there was a picture of our whole office.
Get a close-up of that. Okay. Good.
And here am I looking out over someone's shoulder.
Oh. Point to yourself again, please.
In the second row
Good.
there.
Okay.
So when I saw this in print, I decided it probably was all right to talk about. Well, a couple of years later, I was a classicist teaching Latin and Greek. At a professional meeting, I talked to someone who was preparing a special issue of a journal entitled The Classics and Military Service. He said to me that evening he had enough about stories by men and about men. Did I know any woman who did anything interesting in World War II? And I looked at him and I said, Leon, she's sitting right here with you. All you have to do is ask her. And so he did. And I wrote the article. I entitled it Top Secret Ultra. And I would like to read a little bit of the first paragraph because that will set the stage. Let me get my glasses here. Now, some 50-odd years later, I am able to write those 3 words and to tell the story of my activities as a wave officer from 1943 to 45. My parents never knew what I did. They died before I could talk. My husband only learned after 20 years of marriage. My children were in high school before they knew. David Kahn writes in his book, Seizing the Enigma, Ultra was the greatest secret of World War II after the atom bomb. The German commander, Admiral Dönitz, communicated with his U-boats and controlled their maneuvers by means of the Enigma code machine, considered to be impenetrable. Ultra was the code name assigned to the super-secret operation by the British and later the Americans as they attempted to unlock the technology of that machine. After December, I was one of the few wave officers privileged to serve in the secret inner sanctum at the Naval Communications Annex, where machines broke each day's code. Officers translated the German messages, and we sent the material on to the upper echelons, in fact to the level of combat intelligence immediately below the Comminch, or Admiral King himself.
Gosh. Wow.
So where were we?
Tell me what you did, like day to day when you would go into the office when things were really hot. What would you do?
Well, that's a good question, and that's one that I've gotten when I've given some talks about it. I'd like to tell you a little bit about who was in the office first of all. No one knew what happened behind the closed doors of our office. They were locked with a buzzer, and we had to push this according to a code that was changed every week to get in. And of course, when the doors opened, there was nothing but a wooden barricade because nobody could see anything. There were about 35 people in that office, covered it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There was only one regular Navy man, the commander, who was in charge of the office. The other men were in the Naval Reserve. They had been specially recruited because of their talents. English professors, language professors, philosophy, to work in this office. And so though no one knew what we were doing, we were called the Office of College Professors because of all these men who were working there. We also had on each watch a couple of translators who translated the German messages into English. We had some research people who worked only in the daytime who studied all the U-boats and kept index cards on U-boats and personnel and German military terms and so on and so forth. And we had a hand-picked enlisted secretarial staff who typed all of our work. And there was a neutral shipping desk which also had 2 waves from Goucher from the previous class working there. So it was with those people that I spent my days and nights for 2 years. Now, what did we actually do in there? I guess the easiest thing to say is I was a glorified paper pusher. Certainly never used that cryptology course that we had. One of the Allies' great intellectual successes in the war was the finding out how the Enigma machine worked and then developing a machine which would reverse the messages so they could be translated. So, since the messages were translated by machine, this didn't leave. There was, when I got in, no personal contact really with the messages. You have to remember, I entered in September of 1943. The war had been going on for 4 years, since '39. And all this time, the Battle of the Atlantic was so important because the British Isles needed their supplies. And Winston Churchill, this dominated Winston Churchill's attention the whole way. When I got into the war, there was agreement between the British and the United States to exchange all Enigma messages, all knowledge of the Enigma, the samples of the two machines, and everything was cooperation between them. Actually, Polish cryptanalysts had first unraveled the Enigma machine, the wiring of it, and they developed what was called the bomb, a machine which would unravel this. Both of them worked by electrical pathways, very complicated. It's, of course, when one's dealing with a code, sender and receiver have to have the key. And it was estimated that there were 159 million possibilities of the way this Enigma machine could be set up. Germans didn't think we could ever get into it, but the Allies did, and that gave great advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic. Well, and the third thing, by the time I got in, the Allies were reading the Naval Enigma traffic almost currently. I remember a couple of periods of a week or 10 days when the key couldn't be found and we would be delayed in reading it. But most of the time it was current. So what did I do when I got to my desk? The messages were broken on the machine, the bombs, in an office beneath ours. Their secretarial staff printed out the German messages on long strips of yellow paper, as we used to get our telegrams, and put the messages together and sent them upstairs to our office. They went first to the translators, who by that time had lots of helps. They knew how the messages started, keywords and such, and they knew weather reports and position reports. So they would translate them into English, give them to our typists, who would make copies of the English. The English messages were handed first to the senior watch officer, who read them and studied them, and of course would call our research people to certain ideas. Then the messages were passed down to the junior watch officer's desk, and that was ours. One of our main jobs, there was a big wall map of the Atlantic Ocean with the United States and Europe, and we kept pins for each of the submarines that we knew about, and often received position reports, so we would move those pins to where they were. We kept track of the convoys, and we had little pins with flags on them for convoys. In the meantime, also, we knew how the Germans made a grid over the Atlantic Ocean so that position reports could be given with simple letters and numbers. And we were to keep that up to date. Another important thing we did, each morning on the midwatch about 7:30, we prepared an envelope with all of the messages, the translations from the day, the neutral shipping report, and a U-boat report written by the research people with big letters across the top, top secret ultra. And we put this in an envelope. It was signed over to an armed carrier who appeared every morning at the Naval Communications Annex. He put it in his locked bag and went out to his automobile and carried it by hand downtown to the main Navy Department, where this envelope was taken immediately to the American Submarine Tracking Room, which was the intelligence unit of the Commodore, Admiral King. There were only 4 people who were allowed in there who got these messages. And it was those people who made the decisions whether a convoy needed to be rerouted or whether we could go out and search out a submarine and destroy it. This wasn't quite as easy as it sounded because Winston Churchill and Roosevelt were determined that the Germans not find out that we were reading these messages. So something had to be done that was obvious. For instance, if we knew a submarine was over by Africa, when it was on the surface, a plane, an Allied plane, would have to be sent over, a plane which could be seen. So that, because otherwise, how would we know where these submarines were? Several times during the war, Admiral Dönitz became very suspicious because it seemed that we knew things. We got our convoys out of the way and we were sinking some submarines. But his underlings always persuaded him that Enigma machine could not be broken into. This was the naval traffic. The Army, the Air, and the Navy used the Enigma machine, but with different variations, and the Naval Enigma was the most complicated. So, since Admiral Dönitz could never be persuaded, Germans changed nothing. We read the messages on till the end of the war. And by the end of, I went in September of 43, the end of that year, the tide of the war was beginning to change. The Germans were sinking fewer of our supply ships, and we were sinking more of their U-boats.
Were you still in that position in June of 1944, during the Normandy Invasion?
Yes, and that's a good question because one of the things which I remember most about 1944 was D-Day. All of the Enigmas contributed to the Allies' preparations, to how they learned where the Germans were, what supplies, and so forth. I was on the midwatch, went on midnight June the 5th, and was on to 8 a.m. June the 6th, which 8 a.m. in Washington was afternoon over in Europe. We learned about the invasion because we were reading the traffic currently at the time, a message from Admiral Dönitz to each one of his U-boats that, yes, the Allies had invaded the coast of France. So that's how I found out about it. The Germans, for 3 months, we kept them deceived. They thought there would be a second invasion to the north at Pas-de-Calais, but of course there never was. The story of that deception is very interesting also. There have been books written about it, and it's quite interesting.
Is that when we built the fake army?
Yes, built the fake army over in England, and there, you have a list of books, that handout.
Yes.
I have a handout which I give when I'm talking about Top Secret Ultra. The first, it's arranged not alphabetically but chronologically because the first book is one by Winterbotham in 1974 entitled The Ultra Secret. That's when all this material was declassified. And down near the end of the list, I have one by Gerard, Secret Soldiers, and that's the story of World War II's Army of Deception.
I'll read that.
Fascinating book. And then one from 2003 by Haufler, Codebreaker's Victory, How the Allied Cryptographers Won World War II. This is fascinating also, and historians are beginning to feel that code breaking was a large part of the entire victory in World War II, and that really some of the code breakers should have some of the reputation of the admirals and the generals, because through the code breakers that
shortened the war.
Now, I don't know, here is a picture of the Enigma machine
yeah.
and the bomb, the machine which breaks it. I don't know if that'll come through.
Yeah, we'll get it on here.
My hand shakes.
So that's the Enigma machine on the
This-
left
this
as we're
one.
looking at it on the screen here, the small one.
The typewriter looking
Yeah.
device
And then the large one is
is the bomb.
Okay. And then that's you right above it, right?
That's right.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we got a good picture of both of those now. How much longer after the Normandy Invasion did you
Yes.
serve in that position?
Our office worked, and was really important work, till the day the Germans surrendered in May. Went through the same routine. We continued working through September because there was traffic, particularly from the early parts of the war, that we didn't have the keys for, and so we just caught up on a lot of things and worked, as I say, till September. Wave officers were being dismissed according to the time when they had come into the service. I had 6 months more to go, and so I was moved to an office in the Bureau of Medicine, where I was put to grading doctors' correspondence courses, which was, on the days, was quite different from what I had been doing. I ultimately was released to inactive status in May of 1946.
When you were in this position and you would have free time and you'd be out with friends or whatever you would do socially, how did you handle the questions about what you do, and because it was such a top secret project?
Well, Washington was, of course, full of service people, and so many of them were in work that couldn't be talked about, so no one thought about it too much. And I had a civilian roommate a good part of the time, because officers were given a living allowance, and so I just lived in one of the many women's boarding houses in Washington. My roommate always said she was going to get me to talk in my sleep until I did, which she never did.
Well, did you have a lot of communication with your family during this time?
Oh yes, Baltimore, it's only 40 minutes away on the train from Washington, and since between two of the watches we had 48 hours off, I frequently went home.
Okay.
There were many trains and military people moving all the time. It's one thing about living in Washington then and working all those watches, women were safe any hour of the day or night. We'd go roaming around, because where I lived, I had a 4-block walk to DuPont Circle and then a long bus ride to get out to the communications annex. But midnight, 4 a.m., didn't matter.
Was it an exciting place to be during that period?
Oh yes, oh yes.
So when did you leave the service?
I had a good bit of leave piled up because we couldn't take it all during the early years, or really at all during the war. So actually I went home in March of '46, but was privileged to wear the uniform until the actual date of my discharge, which was in May. So I took advantage of flying, which I could do in uniform, and I had never been to the West Coast, so I flew in a Navy plane from Washington out to the San Francisco area.
What was that like at the time? What was your reaction to what you saw at that age and going out there?
Well, it was amazing. What I remember most about that trip, of course it was a big plane, was that I had to pay 60 cents so they would feed me breakfast on it.
Times have changed.
And then I managed to get a ride back for free. And of course, I was in for 3 years on active service for 3 years, which meant I had 4 years of GI Bill coming to me.
Yeah.
So I stayed out, how much, 3-4 years, and then entered the graduate school of the Johns Hopkins University, and the GI Bill paid for the whole 4 years that it took me to get a master's and a PhD.
Gosh. And what did you get your master's and PhD in? What subject?
Classical languages, Latin, Greek.
Okay.
And of course, when one teaches that, I taught at Georgia State here in Atlanta, meant doing a little bit of everything: archaeology, philosophy, history.
What were you told when you left the military about your position and what you couldn't say and couldn't do? And
I don't remember exactly what we were told, but somehow or other we knew that we couldn't talk. We weren't to tell anyone. My family knew that, I believe my family knew that I worked on the German side of it, but that was the sum total of it.
And what was your feeling when you were finally able to talk about it years down the road?
It took a while to get used to it. And it really wasn't till I saw my picture printed in the book that I felt free to talk about it. And Goucher College had an article about us in their alumni magazine in 1992, and they had quotes from a couple of the women who said they still wouldn't talk about it.
Huh.
There just wasn't any question ever in their minds.
Yeah.
No temptation.
When you were doing this, when you were in the service, did you realize you were part of one of the major events in world history? Pretty much?
No, I know a lot more now about how what we did fit into the overall scheme of the Battle of the Atlantic than I ever knew then.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many good books that have been written in the past 10 years that cover the story and about the machines.
You've had an interesting life since you got out of the service. Would you tell us a little bit about what you've done subsequently?
I received my PhD in 1952 from the Johns Hopkins University. My first teaching position was at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, the Great Books School. That was a very good start for me, but I knew I didn't want to stay in that kind of school, so I taught then for 6 years at Sweetbriar College in Virginia, and in the meantime, Herb and I were married, and when he accepted a position at Emory, we came down to Atlanta, never dreaming we'd still be here now. Both of us loved to travel, and so we became connected with the Virgilian Society of America, which runs a summer program at a villa outside of Naples in Italy. And for a number of years, we ran that summer program over there. When our children were born, because we were paid for the summers that we were over there, we could take the boys with us. And so our 2 children had some summers early on in Italy. Our first sabbatical, we spent the whole year in Italy, in Rome. The 2 boys were with us. They were then 3 and 5. Our second sabbatical we spent in Oxford, England, and the boys went to school in England. They were in middle school by that time. And we have continued to travel in our retired years.
And you make presentations now on your experience in the service, don't you?
Yes, this story that I've told today, Emory University had me give a talk back in April of 2002. That has led to lots of invitations, and I have told my tale now to over 1,000 people. So and to have this happen in the years when I was 79, 80, and 81, I never dreamed possible. Never dreamed I'd be giving public lectures. Yes.
Well, before we stop, is there anything else about your experiences that you would like to tell us? Because it's such a fascinating story, and I want to be sure we haven't missed anything. Anything about while you were in the service, or before or after, but any that you would like to make sure we have included on the tape?
Oh, that's hard to say because one could go into so many details, but I think we've covered the main points of it. I will say, since there are some pictures of me in this, the Waves were very proud of their uniform, particularly that hat.
Could you show us a copy of your picture in the service, in the Waves?
Yes, I have one. Do you want the midship one or just the...
Well, let's look at both of them.
This was as a midshipman, a simpler insignia on the cap, and here as an officer.
Okay. More ornate. Yeah. Those are great pictures. And would you give me the name of your unit, just to be sure that we have that on the tape, the unit that you actually served in?
I was wondering if I had that. It's well, I was at the Naval Communications Annex. Our office, the title of our office was Op 20 GI 2A.
Good.
Op under the Chief of Naval Operations, GI General Intelligence, A the Atlantic Theater.
Okay. Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking your time to come in here. This is a fascinating story, and I don't think we have anything like this from any of our other interviews. And want to thank you for what you did for the country and what you've done since then.
Here, that's yours. Okay. These are the ones that I want. Now, what of mine is? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I thought you were finished.
Now, I'm only going to finish when I'm sure you have presented everything you want to present because it's so interesting. But it sounds like
I think
you've given us a great summary of what you've done, and thank you so much. This is Joe Bruckner with Miss Benario, and there is one other item we want to put on the tape, and I'll let Miss Benario talk about what that is and the background of how she got it.
Throughout the whole war, the story of code breaking dominated Winston Churchill's attention, and he was very fond of the code breakers, his code breakers who worked at Bletchley Park, where a lot of the code breaking, the German Enigma machine went on. There were many brilliant men there, among them Alan Turing. And after I had given the talk the first time, I learned of a conference to be held over at Christ Church in England in September of 2002 entitled Enigma and the Intelligence War. I was invited to go over there and met David Kahn, who wrote Seizing the Enigma, and met many other people who had worked with it. We were taken to Bletchley Park, and I bought this towel from the Churchill room, and so I end my talk usually with Churchill's feeling toward the code breakers as my geese that laid the golden eggs but never cackled.
That's great. Thank you very much.